you may then unmute yourself, ask your question, but then please don't forget to mute yourself again. Before I introduce our next speaker, we are once away, of course, giving away 2 of our bespoke mugs, as always. For a chance of winning a mug, please answer the following question. How many vintage cars does the most worshipful brother Bharat have in his collection? Vintage cars, not all his cars, just the vintage ones. Please type your answers in the chat section, and always the first 2 correct answers will win. Brethren, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to the most worshipful brother, Bharat V. Epur, Grand Secretary of both the Grand Council of the Order of the Allied Masonic Degrees and the Grand Court of the Masonic Order of Athelstan in India. Brethren, whilst reading through Bharat's 37-page bio, which is a fascinating read in itself, it became very evident to me that I really could not do him justice in my introduction. So most worshipful brother Bharat, please forgive me for any omissions or discrepancies. Bharat was initiated into Freemasonry on the 28th of April 1988. Srinivasan Gopala Lodge, number 190.
Amit, can you?
I will repeat that. Brethren, again, like I said,
can you mute?
Yeah, everybody's been muted. Bharat was initiated into Freemasonry on the 28th of April 1988 in Srinivasan Gopala Lodge number 190 in Chennai, India, at the age of 41. He was subsequently passed and raised in the same year. Bharat is a member of no less than 23 craft lodges spanning across the north, east, south and western regions of India, as well as being a member of 5 lodges in the Grand Constitutions of Mauritius, Ireland, New Zealand, and England. He is currently the past Deputy Regional Grand Master in Southern India. Bharat is a member of 15 Holy Rood Arch chapters, 14 Mark Mason lodges, and 13 Royal Ark Mariner lodges, both in India and abroad. He is also a member of the Ancient and Accepted Rite, Rose Choir, Order of the Secret Monitor, Royal and Select Masters, the Ancient and Masonic Order of the Scarlet Cord, a Pendant Order of the Scarlet Mantle of the Masonic Order of Athelstan, Ancient Masonic Order of Alfred the Great, the Operatives, Grand Council of Knight Masons, Knight Templar, Knights Malta, Red Cross of Constantine, Knight Templar Priests, Allied Masonic Degrees, and the Masonic Order of Athelstan, both of which, as I said before, he's currently Grand Master of. To say that Bharat has held several distinguished ranks, both past and present, in all of the aforementioned would be an understatement. Bro Bharat is always spontaneous in his offer of unstinted support to all the brethren who seek his help, well knowing his ability to excel in any task undertaken. His quest for Masonic knowledge, unbelievable appetite for learning, brotherly love, selfless and passionate service to Freemasonry in taking up innovative charity projects, encouraging the brethren to be involved with equal commitment, dedication and sincerity are well known across the Masonic fraternity. Bharat has been actively involved as an alumnus in both his high school and his undergraduate college, namely Hyderabad Public School and the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, in fundraising and other activities. Bharat served as an honorary secretary of the Cosmopolitan Club, Chennai, for the period 2011 to 2013. He has been elected member of the Executive Committee of the Andhra Chamber of Commerce for several years. He is a collector of vintage cars, a voracious reader, a keen quizmaster, a nature lover, and avid world traveler, having visited more than 50 countries. Most worshipful brother Bharat, I hope that I've done you some justice to your expansive resume. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Amit, for that introduction. My ears have become red. My cheeks have become redder. So I do hope that I deliver the paper that is expected of the brethren watching today. Before I proceed any further, I must place on record my very sincere thanks to you, Brother Amit and Brother Maher, for having invited me here. And it was Brother Shri Sinha who probably suggested my name. I thank him for the same. I also wish to place on record my very sincere thanks to Brother Rinesh Hegde, who helped make the presentation, which will come along with the paper. So let's get started. If you could put on screen the presentation, please.
Brother Mahir, I can't share the screen at the moment because you've taken it off there.
Try again, Amit.
Brother Bharat, you can see the...
Yeah, yes, you can, let's start. You can start the slideshow. Okay. Now, about a year ago, 31st of October 2019 to be precise, I was asked to deliver a talk on the history of English Freemasonry in Chennai by my very good friend, Most Worshipful Paul Johnston, the Grand Master of the Masonic Order of Athelstan in England. It was in his lodge, Beamish Temple Lodge at Beamish Hall Country House in County Durham in England. So that presentation was more of an extempore presentation. So that served as a kernel on which I built this paper. And the earlier paper was restricted to English Freemasonry in Chennai. Today's paper is about the origins of Masonry as such in India on a larger basis. So I hope I'll be able to do some justice to that. And brethren, mind you, this is a private retelling of some episodes that shaped the beginnings and the development and growth of modern Freemasonry. It is by no means a scholarly examination of the beginnings. Also, I'm restricting myself to what we know as Masonry, the modern version of Masonry. I will not go into ancient Masonry, which is the Masonic concepts which were developed several thousand years ago. So there is evidence of that also in India, but I will not go into that subject. I shall confine myself to the origins of modern Freemasonry in India. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, the next slide. Right. Now, as I said, this is not a scholarly examination. Before we proceed any further, let us look at the world map and the political situation in the 1600s. You will see a picture on your screen of Emperor Aurangzeb, who was one of the last greatest Mughal emperor. He ruled from 1658 to 1707 AD, and he had immense political strength, and his kingdom spread over a vast part of the subcontinent. His domain was well known as a well-administered area, and the commerce and economic aspects were at the highest. At that time, India was arguably called probably the richest nation on earth, and its share of the GDP was about 28% of the world GDP at that point in time. This naturally created a situation where his successors had a tough task to follow. And as expected, once he died, the empire started disintegrating, and various Maharajas, Rajas, and Nawabs took control of different parts of the territory. And this was also a time ripe for outsiders to come to India. The European seafaring nations were getting increasingly attracted by the legendary wealth of India. Among the first to arrive, next slide, please. Yeah. Can you have the next slide, please? Yeah, among the first to arrive were the Portuguese. The Portuguese under Vasco da Gama came in 1498. We have gone too far. I mean, just go back one slide. Yeah, that's it. Vasco da Gama came in 1498. However, the actual presence of the Portuguese lasted from 1505 until as late as 1961, when the last bit of Indian territory was controlled by them, which was the town of Goa and a few other enclaves elsewhere, was liberated by the newly established Indian army after the independence of India. I must here state that there is scant evidence of any of this Portuguese Masonic presence in India. We shall go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, at this point in time, there was a war between Spain and Portugal in 1661, and Spain approached England for help. This led to a marriage of convenience between King Charles II with Princess Catherine of Braganza. Now, King Charles demanded a dowry, and the dowry was a set of islands in what later became known as Bombay. This was the beginning of the English presence in India. And this served as one of their holdouts for domination in India. The next to arrive, next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. The next to arrive were the Dutch, whose main base was in the island of Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. The company which they worked under was known as the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, was more commonly known by its initials as VOC, also known as the Dutch East India Company. VOC was probably at its height the largest multinational company ever set up. As per records, if you calculate its market cap in those days, translated to today's money, it was more than some of the Fortune 500 top companies combined. This was the truly great multinational company. And VOC was in India from 1605 to 1825. However, the influence of the Dutch got smashed after they were completely routed both by land and sea forces of Raja Martanda Varma of Travancore in the famous Battle of Coleshell, which happened on 10th of August, 1741. This effectively sealed the fate of Dutch in India, and they shifted their focus towards what they called the Dutch East Indies, or the Spice Islands, now known as Indonesia. But the Dutch people did leave a Masonic presence in India, which is Lord Solomon, which was consecrated at a place called Tandelga, April 7th, 1758, in Chinsura, which is in Bengal. And Brother Jacob Larwood Van Shevishaven was the person who consecrated this particular lodge. Thereafter, there was no great evidence of any expansion of Dutch Masonry in India. The next slide, please. Following, I think we went too far. Just one slide back. I mean, yeah. Okay, sorry. Let's proceed to the next slide. Right. After that came the French. Now the French were established in places like Pondicherry, Karaikal, Yangon, and Mahe, which you can see on your map. They came between the years 1674 and 1739. And they occupied quite large areas of what is now modern Andhra Pradesh and the state of Orissa. In the 18th century, the French and the Dutch and the British saw constant conflict, but finally the British who prevailed. They won two major battles. One was the Battle of Plassey in 1757 in what is now Bengal, and the Battle of Wandiwash in 1761 in what is now Tamil Nadu. This kind of established the supremacy of the British East India Company as a supreme military and political power, both in southern India as well as in Bengal. The French established Lord Sincere Amity in Pondicherry, which was chartered in 1787 under the French Constitution. Apart from this, they had naval lodges. Because the naval lodges were not recognized members of the Grand Lodge of France, but in due course, they were affiliated to other lodges which were under the Grand Lodge of France, and therefore you could consider them as Masons. The conflicts between the English and the French had a direct impact on the early Freemasonry in India. I shall explain that a little later down the paper. The next slide, please. After this came the Danes. Denmark and Norway had a presence in India of over 200 years. They established a trading outpost in a place called Tranquebar in Tamil Nadu in 1620, in Serampore in West Bengal in 1755, in Calicut in Kerala in 1752, and in the Nicobar Islands in the middle of the Bay of Bengal in 1750s. However, their presence was neither of military or mercantile threat to the British, so they were basically let alone to their own devices. Tranquebar was the last Dano-Norwegian outpost that was sold to the British on 16th of October, 1868. They left a lodge behind there, it's de l'amour fraternel, which means to brotherly love. It was under the Danish constitution. It was consecrated in 1807. This lodge no longer exists. In fact, Dutch Freemasonry disappeared from India more than 100 years ago. The next slide, please. Yeah. Now, let's talk about the Irish. The Irish, the first lodge to be warranted by the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which arrived in India, was attached to the 39th Regiment. It arrived in Madras in 1754. This may rightly be considered as the first Irish lodge in India. This lodge, number 128, was warranted in 1742 and was known as Primus in India. That was a name given to the lodge, Primus in India. In the early years, it was always the less privileged who made that arduous journey from Britain to India that was fraught with risks. The majority therefore comprised the Scots, the Welsh, and the Irish, and not the relatively prosperous and contented English. Coming over to India was a lonely business. The risks to health and life were high. Not everyone who did meet with success. Many died in the attempt. Friendship and a concept of brotherhood helped such people to cope with an unfamiliar land, and thus it was that Freemasonry came to play a significant role. Joseph Golder, in his book, Freemasonry in British India, he avers that it was the Irish Grand Lodge that devised most of the administrative mechanisms that facilitated Masonry's spread abroad. They set up a system of certificates for traveling brethren, which effectively functioned as passports. Freemasonry granted its members a sort of supranational identity. There was indeed a degree of necessity in becoming a Mason if one were to travel relatively safely in the empire. The next slide, please. The lodges on the move were common in the early years. Regimental lodges were the primary mechanism in spreading Freemasonry. As the Irish comprised the bulk of East India Company's army and the regiments that were sent over by the British government as well, it was no wonder, therefore, that the early efforts at propagating Freemason in India were by the Irish. The Grand Lodge of Ireland even developed what they called traveling warrants, which allowed Masons to congregate on the frontiers of the empire without having to petition their Grand Lodge every time they changed location. By these means, some lodges operated in Europe, Egypt, Malta, and in India. Irish Freemasonry has had a checkered existence in India from those early days, and it continues to function in India even today. There are currently 10 craft lodges organized under the Provincial Grand Lodge of Ireland in India, which is headquartered in Mumbai. They are under the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Next slide, please. Now let's move on to the Scottish. The Scots came soon after. Although the first lodge to be consecrated was on the Indian subcontinent was not in India, but in 1801 in Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, Scottish Freemasonry came to India soon after. At the annual communication of the Grand Lodge of Scotland held at Edinburgh on the 30th of November, 1836, Grand Master Mason, the Right Honorable Lord Ramsay, during his address informed the members that Brother Dr. James Burns of the Honorable East India Company's medical services was about to return to India and proposed that he be appointed Provincial Grand Master over the provinces of Western India and the dependencies, with authority to establish lodges in those provinces. This was approved unanimously, and Brother Dr. Burns was accordingly issued a commission dated 30th of November, 1836. He then arrived in Bombay towards the end of December 1837, and on the 1st of January 1838, opened and established the Provincial Grand Lodge of Western India and its dependencies under the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and then appointed his officers. If the army had Irishmen, the Scots outnumbered everyone else. I mean, just wait, don't go beyond this. The administrator, if the army had Irishmen, the Scots outnumbered everyone else in the running of the British Empire. They were administrators, doctors, judges, and businessmen. Reverend C.H. Malden, in his monumental work titled The History of Freemasonry on the Coast of the Coromandel, says that without the Irish and the Scottish, they were very free in giving permission to set up lodges, without even applying for permission from their respective Grand Lodges. This practice could have led to some misunderstandings, which were regulated by the introduction of so-called provisional warrants. Now, brethren, these provisional warrants were issued by the local worthies in India, authorizing the setting up of new lodges. And this they did without getting prior permission from the Grand Lodges back home in the United Kingdom. So once this provisional warrant was given and the new lodge was consecrated in India, then they would apply back to the Grand Lodge, asking them to regularize this by giving what they called a confirmatory warrant. So this idea was that if they were to wait for official authorization prior to consecration, it would take more than a year or even sometimes 2 years to get the authorization for them to start. So they came up with this shortcut of a provisional warrant followed by a confirmation warrant. And more often than not, the confirmation warrants were indeed sent. The first lodge which was consecrated by Dr. Burns in India was Lodge Hope number 337 in Karachi, which is now in Pakistan, on 25th of April, 1842. Thereafter, he consecrated several other lodges, including Lodge Rising Star of Western India, number 342 in Bombay. And this particular lodge, Western Star of Western India, served as a portal to admit Indians into Freemasonry. Among them, the first being Parsis, followed by the Muslims, and finally the Hindus. So this Lodge Star of Western India played a seminal role in introducing Freemasonry to Indians. This lodge continues to function even today. There are currently 29 craft lodges organized under the District Grand Lodge of India, under the Grand Lodge of Scotland. The headquarters is also in Mumbai. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here you see a map of India showing the European settlements from year 1498 to 1739. If you spend a little time on it, you will notice the various towns and centers where cities grew up. And you can see the flag next to the name of the city, which identifies which European colony it was. And you can see that they were mostly settled along the coastline. This is how it was in that period. It was only after the mid-1700s that they started going into the interiors. Until then, it was purely for trading purposes and not for conquest. Next slide, please. Yeah, now we come to the English presence. The East India Company, also known as John Company, was formed by a royal charter issued by Queen Elizabeth I on 31st of December 1600. For its own protection, it recruited mainly from the local armed forces. It also received protection from the British Royal Navy under the command of Admiral Watson that patrolled the Indian Ocean. With the progressive disintegration of the Mughal Empire and the establishment of many local rulers, the time was ripe for outsiders to meddle, manipulate, and make hay. The Nizam of Hyderabad, who had broken free of the Mughal yoke, ruled over a vast area in the Deccan Plateau. He had his own subordinate rulers, such as the Nawab of Arcot, who governed the Carnatic coast. It was in this milieu that the East India Company established a factory at Masulipatam, north of Fort St. George, now known as Madras, and most recently as Chennai. Another one was at Fort William in Calcutta, now known as Kolkata in Bengal. Also, as mentioned earlier, some of the islands of the western coast that later became the city of Bombay, now known as Mumbai, came into the hands of the English thanks to the Dowry settlement. Thus was set the beginning of the three great presidencies of Madras, Bengal, and Bombay. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, far away on the European continent, the wars of the Austrian succession from 1740 to 1748 commenced. It was a war that involved most of the great powers and lesser powers of Europe over the issue of Maria Theresa's succession to the Habsburg monarchy. The war had many peripheral events, such as King George's War from 1744 to 1748, the War of Jenkins' Year, which formally began on 23rd of October 1739 in the Caribbean, the First Carnatic War in India, Jacobite Rising in 1745 in Scotland, and the First and Second Silesian Wars from 1740 to 45. This resulted in the traders of each European country seeking to safeguard their own interests by raising local armies in India commanded by European officers. The whole purpose was to defend their commercial interests. Over time, this expanded to greater and more ambitious motives, including the colonial goals of political, military, economic, cultural, and religious hegemony. Next slide, please. As more British troops were sent to India to protect the interests of the East India Company, more and more Freemasons among them came to India.
I went to Sudan. I got a season ticket at my local book club.
Okay, and what bands are you currently wanting to go and see, or have you? Very good.
Ed Sheeran, I've been to Ed Sheeran this year.
Can you mute that, please?
Now, Melissa, you're on 37. You have
Bharat, if you could just unmute yourself, please, that'd be fantastic.
Sorry. As more British troops were sent to India to protect the interests of the East India Company, more and more Freemasons among them came to India. This was the introduction of British and most specifically the English Freemasonry into India. Freemasonry entered India within 11 years of the establishment of the premier Grand Lodge in England. The honor of receiving English Freemasonry in India goes to Calcutta. The first fixed lodge founded across the British Empire was the Star of the East Lodge at Fort William in Bengal in 1728. This was numbered 72 in the register of the Grand Lodge of England. On the 27th of December 1728, a deputation was granted by the Grand Lodge of England and to George Pomfret, authorizing him to open a new lodge in Bengal. Preston says, quote, he first introduced Masonry into the English settlements in India, unquote. And Pomfret also figures in the Masonic yearbook as the first provincial Grand Master for East India. The Grand Lodge issued a letter to him, quote, to empower and authorize our well-beloved brother Pomfret that he do in our place and stead constitute a regular lodge in due form at Fort William in Bengal in the East Indies, unquote. This was signed and sealed the 6th day of February 1729 and in the year of Masonry 5732. The lodge at Fort William appears in the engraved list of 1730 as number 72. It was to meet at Fort William in Calcutta. The coat of arms of this lodge was adopted from the coat of arms of the East India Company, which is a golden lion rampant guardant supporting between the forepaws a regal crown. Nothing, however, is known further about this particular individual Pomfret. He was succeeded in 1729 by Captain Ralph Farwinter as Provincial Grand Master for the East India and Bengal. And under his direction, the lodge was duly established. And there's a lot of material available on Farwinter, but sadly not much on Pomfret. The records of the Grand Lodge of England contain an entry to the effect that Captain Farwinter in the year 1731 attended a communication as Provincial Grand Master for India. And on his return to India, he sent to England, quote, from his Lodge of Bengal, a chest of the best arrack for the use of the Grand Lodge and 10 guineas for Masonic charity. At the communication held in the year 1733, the thanks of the Grand Lodge of England were voted for this particular gift. The following letter of thanks, which was sent by the Grand Lodge of England to the Provincial Grand Lodge of Bengal, is taken from a copy which appears in the Rollins collection in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. It goes like this, quote, Right Worshipful Grand Master, Deputy and Wardens, with the worshipful members of the Grand Lodge of Calcutta in Bengal in East India. All our fraternity here rejoice much in the frequent good conduct of your excellent conduct. The Grand Lodge have been refreshed by teal present of arrack, which made curious punch. And you may telling believe that we drank all your healths after the ancient manner of Masons. We return a hearty thanks for it.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, next slide. Okay. We return a hearty thanks for it, but much however, two handsome presents of 10 guineas by Captain Farwinter and 20 guineas by Captain Rigby for the relief of our brethren. We lodge in the hands of our treasurer and recorded in our books as the lasting posterity, strong and extensive in all confesses billows from the reason, and we heartily rejoice in your honor and reputation, as you're a part of ourselves. For all Freemasonry in India and Ceylon redounds to us, and we cannot forbear say that no lodge out of Britain has been so generous and so deserving our esteem. Providence has fixed your lodge near those learned Indians that affected to be called Noachide, the strict observers of his precepts taught in those parts by the disciples of the great Zoroastrians, the learned Archimagus of Bactria, of Grandmasters or the Magians, whose religion is largely preserved in India, which we have no concern about, and also many of the rituals of the ancient fraternity used in his time, perhaps more than they are sensible of themselves. Now, if it was consistent with your business to discover in those parts the remains of old Masonry and transmit them to us, we should all be thankful, but especially the learned brothers who grasp new discoveries from ancient nations that have been renowned for art and science and must have valuable remains among them still. The Grand Master, Lord Viscount Weymouth, orders me to write this with as many commendations as you can imagine from all the brethren who, I may assure you, of their most sincere affection and I am with great esteem, right worshipful and honored brethren, your most humble and affectionate brother, Royal Secretary of the Grand Lodge. This is unquote. This is an exact letter which was written in the year 1733. Brethren, from those charming beginnings, Freemasonry in India grew strong roots and spread throughout, primarily under the hegemony of the East India Company at first, and then after the First War of Independence of 1857, sometimes referred to as the Sepoy Mutiny, under that of the British Raj. In the beginning, the majority of Freemasons were drawn from the nobility, the military, administrative staff, the clergy, and then the mercantile class. It remained a purely European club for a very long time. Indians, especially Hindus, had to wait for several years to pass before being admitted into the fraternity. I would like to bring to your particular attention the contribution of English Freemasons from Madras to hasten the unification of the competing Grand Lodges in England between the ancients and the moderns, which many of you may not be aware of. As per the book Brotherhood and Benevolence, written by Sriram and Bharat, between the years 1768 and 1786, it would appear that the ancients or the Athol Masons had gained the upper hand in Madras. Can you have the next slide, please? Lodge number 152 at Fort St. George, which was an Athol lodge, began to gain so high a prominence that it soon desired to take on the role of the provincial Grand Lodge of Madras under Athol Freemasonry, arrogating to itself the power of issuing warrants for the setting up of subordinate lodges. They followed up with a letter to the Athol Grand Lodge seeking regularization of this act. The anticipated response from the Athol Grand Lodge was slow in coming, even by the notoriously lethargic standards of the day. By 1785, Colonel Joseph Moorhouse of Lodge number 152 was the man in charge. He was a celebrated army man who would meet his end in the Third Anglo-Mysore War of 1791, which was led by Lord Cornwallis, who was himself a Mason. This was the battle against Tipu Sultan. Under Colonel Moorhouse, the ancient Athol Masons chafed at the tardy response and perceived negligence of the Athol Grand Lodge in England. Adding to their consternation was the fact that the rival body, the moderns, had begun to flourish. In 1786, Brigadier Matthew Horn had been appointed Provincial Grand Master for the regulars. He and a brother, the indefatigable Terence Gahagan, who was the same brother who initiated the first Indian ever, they commenced measures to effect a union between the two competing branches of Masonry in Madras. Brother Moorhouse was a ready collaborator for them from the other side. The terms of the union, which they wrote amongst themselves, span 11 articles. Then Gahagan wrote letters to England in which he made it appear as though the Athol Masons, that is, read Lord number 152, had surrendered unconditionally to the regulars. But in reality, this was not so. Their subterfuge worked. Congratulations began to pour in. William Preston, in his book Illustrations of Freemasonry, which was then the principal publication for Freemasonry worldwide, praised this union. Calcutta Masons also sent in their congratulations. Thus, the union of the ancient and moderns, or the Grand Union as it came to be known, ushered in stability in the working of the fraternity on the Coromandel coast. It was a momentous occasion as it preceded the actual union in England by nearly 3 decades, because it was not until 1813 that union came about in London. The first act that the union did after its formation was a new formation of a new lodge, and they called it the Lodge of Perfect Unanimity. It was a subliminal message to the Masonic leaders back in England, if there was ever one. Now numbered 150, this lodge continues to exist, and it is the oldest continuously functioning lodge under the English Constitution in the District Grand Lodge of Madras. Next slide, please. This lodge had its own building. They named the building also Perfect Unanimity. You see in the slide there, two views of that building. This magnificent structure has recently been fully restored to its old glory, and is located in a very prime location on the Marina Beach in Madras. And this now serves as the headquarters of the State Police Department. And I'm told that inside the building, they've preserved the original Masonic temple in its pristine beauty. Next slide, please. The English Constitution continues to function in India. It has 4 districts comprising the District Grand Lodge of Bengal, the District Grand Lodge of Madras, the District Grand Lodge of Bombay, and the District Grand Lodge of Northern India, with headquarters in Calcutta, Chennai, Mumbai, and Delhi, respectively. Each of the districts has 23, 18, 23, and 5 lodges in that order. Total number of English lodges functioning in India now is 69. Now, the next part of my talk is about some of the pioneering Indian Freemasons. I'd like to spend a little time on this because it's got some relevance, historical interest. On the screen, you see a photograph of Amdata Lomra Bahadur. He was the Nawab of the Carnatic, and he was the first Indian ever to be initiated. And this happened in the year 1775 in Trichinopalli Lodge, number 3. And the person who initiated him was the same Terence Gahagan, whom I mentioned earlier. The circumstances attending this are very, very special. I remember I told you about the Anglo-Mysore Wars, where the English defeated the father-son duo of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. Now, in that war, the British sought the assistance of the Nawabs of Arcot. The Nawabs of Arcot agreed to side with the British against Tipu Sultan, and the combined armies were responsible for beating Tipu Sultan in the famous Battle of Srirangapatnam. And as a reward for that, when this Nawab sought to be made a Freemason, as a reward for that, when the Nawab sought to be made a Freemason, his request was accepted, and he was indeed initiated and became the first Mason ever from India. Now, there's an interesting letter which he wrote to the Grand Master of England at that, and I had the privilege of reading that letter myself. I had gone during one of my many visits to London. I went to the Masonic Museum and Library at Great Queen Street. And there I asked the librarian, Susan Snell, if she had anything of interest pertaining to this particular person. And lo and behold, she gave me an extremely fragile looking parchment, which was sealed within its own microclimatically controlled container. She placed it on the table and gave me a pair of gloves, which I had to wear to handle it. And this was a letter from the very same Nawab to the then Grand Master, expressing his sincere thanks for having been allowed to be initiated into the craft. I will now read you the English translation of that letter. It says, quote, "To the Right Worshipful, His Grace the Duke of Manchester, Grand Master, the illustrious and benevolent fraternity of free and accepted Masons under the Constitution of England and the Grand Lodge thereof." Excuse me. Most honored sir and brethren, an early knowledge and participation of the benefits arising to our house from its intimate union of counsels and interests with the British nation, and the deep veneration for the laws, constitutions, and manners of the latter, have for many years of my life led me to seize every opportunity of drawing the ties subsisting between us still closer and closer. By the accounts which have reached me of the principles and practices of your fraternity, nothing though be more pleasing to the sovereign ruler of the universe, whom we all, though in different ways, adore, or more honorable to his creatures, for they stand upon the broad basis of indiscriminate and universal benevolence. Under this conviction, I have long wished to be admitted to your fraternity, and now that I am initiated, I consider the title of an English Mason as one of the most honorable I possess, for it is at once a cement of the friendship between your nation and me, and confirms me the friend of mankind. I have received from the Advocate General of Bengal, Sir John Day, the very acceptable mark of attention and esteem with which you have favored me. It has been presented with every circumstance of deference and respect that the situation of things here and the temper of the times would admit of. And I do assure you, Grace, and the brethren at large, that he has done ample justice to the commission you have confided to him and has executed it in such manner as to do honor to himself and to me. I shall avail myself of a proper opportunity to convince your Grace and the rest of the brethren that Umdatul Umrah is not an unfeeling brother or heedless of the precepts he has imbibed, and that while he testifies his love and esteem for his brethren by strengthening the hands of humanity, he means to administer to the wants of the distressed. May the common Father of art, the one omnipotent and merciful God, take you into his holy keeping and give you health, peace, and length of years. Pray your highly honored and affectionate brother, Umdatul Umrah Bahadur, Madras, September 29th, 1778, unquote. The very acceptable mark of attention which he referred to in his letter is a Masonic apron that was gifted to him by the Grand Lodge of England. So that, my brother, was the first person ever to be made a Mason in India. We go on to the next slide, please. Now, the Parsis from Mumbai were initiated into Masonry before the Hindus. This was because the British accepted them earlier because of their perceived more European outlook and temperament, and probably because they were adherents of a monotheistic faith, much like the Muslims. But this did not happen overnight. The person you see on screen is Manikji Kursetji, who was the doyen of the Bombay Parsi community in the 1840s. He applied to become a Freemason in Lodge Perseverance, number 546 in the English Constitution. He was rejected. He then went to Paris and got initiated in Lodge La Gloire de l'Univers. And he returned to Bombay and once again applied to Lodge Perseverance to be rejected a second time. Thereafter, well-meaning brethren petitioned to start a new lodge wherein the natives could be initiated. And this is what I mentioned earlier. Thus, Lodge Rising Star of Western India came under the Constitution, Scottish Constitution, and Manikji Kursetji joined this lodge and he rose to preeminence. Incidentally, on one of his visits to London, he met Arthur Wellesley, the second Duke of Wellington, whose father, Arthur Wellesley, had been entertained by his own father in Bombay at a garden party many years later. His second son, Kursetji Manikji, was admitted to Oxford University and Lincoln's Inn, and he was the first Indian to be admitted as an undergraduate at Oxford University. Another son of his, Jahangir Manakji Kursetji, matriculated from Trinity College in Cambridge in 1867. So they chose the right person there as the first Parsi. Among the Hindus, next slide, please. Among the Hindus, there was a problem because of their perceived polytheism. It presented a severe challenge to the powers that be. This diffidence to accept Hindus lasted until the more erudite among them, as well as among the Hindus, were able to clarify that the various deities in Hinduism were nothing more than mere manifestations of the different aspects of the same God. Ranganath Shastri was the first Hindu ever to be admitted to Freemasonry in the same Lodge of Perfect Unanimity, which I mentioned to you from Madras in the year 1857. The picture you see on the screen is that of Prasanna Kumar Dutt, who became the first Hindu to be made a Freemason in Bengal in 1872. He doggedly persevered in his quest to become a Freemason against entrenched racism among the Englishmen of Bengal in the 1850s. He began a long series of correspondence with the Grand Lodge of England, protesting against the iniquity of their Bengal representatives. Finally, after very many blackballings and after 9 years of persistent appeals, his pleas were heard and England directed the illiberal locals to initiate him, which was done despite their unrepentant dismay. So doughty was Brother Dutt that with diligence and faith in himself and in the true Masonic principles, he ultimately rose to the office of Deputy District Grand Master of the District Grand Lodge of Bengal, which was then the largest district in the world in terms of geographic spread from Aden to Singapore, as well as in terms of the importance accorded to its District Grand Master. The duties and responsibility of this office of Deputy District Grand Master, he acquitted with great honor and distinction. And finally, we come to the first Sikh who was made a Mason, was Brother Dulip Singh in Lord Star in the East in the year 1861. I regret I don't have further information about him. Next slide, please. I applaud these pioneers of yesteryears, as it was to them we owe our subsequent entry into this ancient and honorable fraternity, thus enabling us to partake of its abundant blessings. Freemasonry flourished in India under the grand lodges of the European colonizers, specifically England, Scotland, and Ireland, well beyond India attaining its own independence in the year 1947. It was only in the year 1960 that an idea took root that India, being a sovereign, independent, democratic republic, ought to have its own sovereign Grand Lodge. After intense discussions between the representatives of Indian Freemasonry and those of the Grand Lodges of England, Scotland, and Ireland, an agreement was reached that these three parent Grand Lodges would jointly constitute and consecrate the Grand Lodge of India. Accordingly, the members of each of the functioning lodges in India under these three constitutions were asked to take a special ballot among their members to ascertain whether they would be willing to disassociate their lodge from the existing Grand Lodge and opt to become foundation lodges for the proposed new Grand Lodge of India to be consecrated soon. This exercise was conducted scrupulously across the country, and 145 lodges voted to become foundation lodges. The rest chose to retain their linkages to the existing parent Grand Lodges. The regular Sovereign Grand Lodge, next slide please. The regular Sovereign Grand Lodge of India was consecrated at Hotel Ashoka in New Delhi on 24th of November 1961 by the representatives of the three parent Grand Lodges, namely the Deputy Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, Right Worship Brother William Gerald Charles Cadogan, the 7th Earl of Cadogan, whose picture on the top, the Grand Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, Most Worshipful the Archibald Montgomery, the 17th Earl of Eglinton, who's pictured in the bottom, and the Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Ireland, Right Worshipful George Gamble, whose picture, unfortunately, I do not have. Next slide, please. The first Grand Master to be installed of Grand Lodge of India was Most Worshipful Brother Major General His Highness Ali Jah Farzande Dilap Wazir Daulat Inglisha Mukhlis Dawla Nasirul Mulk Amirul Umrah Nawaz Said Sir Muhammad Raza Ali Khan Bahadur Ustad Jang Nawab of Rampur, Grand Cross of the Indian Empire, Knight Commander of the Star of India, and that is a mouthful, but he is known as the Nawab of Rampur. And there you see him in his bejeweled finery. He was the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of India. And it, as I said, comprised those 145 foundation lodges. And the total membership in 1961 was 7,466. And currently we stand at about 445 lodges with a membership of around 20,000. Now, brethren, this has been by no means, as I said, definitive history of Masonry in India, but I thought I would just share some of the highlights of it which caught my interest. And I'm running out of time, and I do wish and hope that if you are interested, you do your further studies. I thank you for your patience and cooperation in hearing. I'm open to questions. Thank you once again.
Most worshipful, thank you so much for that. I hope my slide skills were equally as good as that talk.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for your help.
No problem at all. Just waiting for some questions to come through. Shri, can we go to you, please?
Sure, thanks. Thank you so much, Amit, for accepting my request, because we're very grateful that Most Worshipful Brother Bharat actually went through with this presentation today. It was quite interesting, of course. Brother Bharat, a quick question on the advent of Freemasonry amongst the native Indians. what do we have any understanding of what motivated the first initiation, both from the point of view of the initiate as well as from the point of view of the Europeans who acceded to that request? And I'm talking about, of course, the Nawab in the Deccan, as opposed to what happened in Bombay at a later date in time.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the first initiation was of the Nawab of Arcot.
Yeah, Nawab of
Arcot. And that was purely a kind of a quid pro quo, in the sense he extended his full support to the British against Tipu Sultan's army. And when he expressed a desire to become a Mason, they couldn't say no. And the other issue there was the person involved there, Terence Gahagan, was kind of a maverick. He was kind of a maverick. So he was a sort of chap who could take bold decisions, and he did take that decision to go ahead and initiate him. So all things worked out well in the end. As far as the Bombay experience is concerned, the gentleman there, Manakji Kasirji, had to go in a very roundabout manner, go to Paris, get initiated under the French Grand Lodge, come back and becoming a joining member of the Scottish Lodge, which was that specifically created for quote unquote native Masons. And the experience in Calcutta was even less honorable. It took that man 9 years of persistence to be allowed to become a Mason. So it was not something which happened willingly or gladly. It was something which the Indians had to work on.
And a follow-up question, was it essentially a way for Indians who had attained some degree of wealth and social position to be finally accepted into the sort of elite circle? Would that be a fair assessment?
That would be a very fair statement to make, because it was only they who, first of all, were in the same circles as the other Masons. It would be very difficult to expect a person of ordinary means, a native of ordinary means, to even move in the same circle. So they won't even know that there's such a thing as a Masonic experience or a fraternity. So you need to be of a certain social class to be even aware of such a thing. And that was true many, many years later on, even after the many more Indians got into the fraternity. It was a highly restrictive environment. It was not so as in probably in England, where you could be of a, for lack of a better word, a lower social class. But in India, it was not so. For a long time, it was restricted to the quote unquote upper classes.
Thank you, Sri.
Chief, what was the fee during those days?
Sorry, brethren, could you please mute yourselves? We're asking questions in order. As I alluded to before, please do not mind, but it makes it rather difficult if you all start unmuting yourself and asking questions. If we could please next go to Vikash Bananji, please.
Thank you very much, Brother Bharat. Thank you very much for a very insightful talk with regard to the origins of Freemasonry in India. As somebody who likes traveling around quite a bit and visiting lodges around the place where I haven't been before, would there be any specific parts? You had mentioned the headquarters of the police as one of the Masonic buildings that was used. Right. Are there any other specific sort of Masonic landmarks that one would visit if they were to come across to India, and which parts would you know? I'm not sure on top of your head.
See, there are lots of famous monuments and buildings in India which were related directly to Masonry. In fact, most of the public monuments and buildings in all the 4 major cities, Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, and Chennai, the foundation stone was laid with Masonic ceremonial. So you will see a Masonic influence in many of these monuments and buildings. In Chennai, for instance, many of the buildings of the Madras University campus, the magnificent Connemara Library, the Senate House, Fort St. George itself, which is the origins of British rule there, And there are so many other buildings, all have been built by Masonic rules and regulations. In Calcutta, you have an enormous number of buildings which have got a Masonic connection. So does Bombay. And just for your interest, there's a building in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is in central India. There's a very interesting story about that. The Masons in Hyderabad were not having a regular place to have their meetings. So they were looking for some place. And coincidentally, the ruler of Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad at that time, supposedly was slighted by the British. See, the British had developed a very keen system of rewards and merits. So if they wanted to curry favor with somebody, they would give them a little more than somebody else. So one of the things they developed was this gun salute. So obviously the Queen had the Royal Salute, a 21 gun salute. Below that was a 19 gun salute, and below that was a 17 gun salute, similar to the knocks of our Masonic orders. So the top kings, Maharajas of India were given 19 guns, whereas the Nizam of Hyderabad was only given 17 gun salute. And though he was the wealthiest of the lot, the largest kingdom under him, for some reason he was slighted. So the story goes that he tried moving all sorts of petitions to try to get those extra 2 gun salutes so as to be on par with the other princes. But nothing came, and he was getting increasingly frustrated. Coincidentally, at the same time, the Masons of the city of Hyderabad and Secunderabad were looking for a place of their own. So some kind soul saw an opportunity there, and he went to the Nizam and told him, if you give a place for these guys to meet, the Masons will help you get the 2 gun salute. And lo and behold, he donated one of his palaces to the Masons, which still is used now. And within 6 months, he got his 2 extra gun salutes. Now, I don't know whether the Masons were responsible or not, but he did get his 19 gun salute. And that building, which was donated by him, is known as Goshamal Baradari. It's one of the Masonic temples now in Hyderabad. And it's more than 400 years old building. It's one of the oldest Masonic, and one of the oldest buildings used for Masonic purposes. So it's more than 400 years old. So there is a story there in that also. So it depends on where you're going. I can certainly recommend lots of buildings for you to look at.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very insightful, and I will look forward to potentially getting some more from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vikash.
Thank you.
Next, can we go to Ardeshir? Brother Eddie? Do you want to unmute yourself, Eddie?
Yes. Bharat, first of all, thank you for an excellent history of Freemasonry in India. My question is, correct me if I'm wrong, Manikji Kharshed, before he was initiated in France, I'm told went to the Grand Master of England and requested to be initiated in England. But the Grand Master saw it may not be possible and then requested his friend, the then Grand Master of France, to arrange for Manikji Kharshed to be initiated in France. Is that right?
Yes, I've also read the same story, and it was, yes, he in fact did introduce Manikji Kharshed to his colleague in France. Yes, that is true. I read that also. But the actual initiation did take place in
yes,
Paris.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Could we go to Ashok, please?
Most worshipful Grand Master, thanks for a very good presentation. Just I want to clarify, I have seen this Lodge Hub number 4 in Meerut, and I believe it was consecrated in sometime in 1700 when that city was actually a hub of British Army. It was a very big Kent area in Meerut, and I have visited this very old building in this town. So just wanted to ask you, have you actually looked at the North Indian lodges as well, or just your research is around big cities, or just South India? Or...
No, some of the more interesting stories, brother, are from smaller towns. As I mentioned to you, Freemasonry spread in India primarily through the army. You know, because the cantonment lodge, the regimental lodges which went around first. So from there on, whenever the army established a cantonment, it was but natural for Freemason lodges to start in those cantonments. So like you mentioned, Meerut, similarly Ambala, you know, all these places, Faizabad, these are all cantonment towns. And you also had the hill stations like Shimla, Masonry, Dalhousie, yeah, all of them. Yeah, so it was very important for the army people to have their own premises for the lodges. And then the next stage of things came when the railways started in India. So you had lots of lodges in railway headquarters towns. So invariably they were built on railway land. So many of the old lodges buildings are still owned, the land is owned by the army. So similarly the railway towns. So that was a fact of history. So there is no doubt about it. And there are lots of interesting stories. If you go visit these old lodges, as you mentioned, Hope in Meerut, Independence with Philanthropy in Allahabad, and then there is so many other lodges. Each one has remarkably preserved their heritage. It's a beautiful experience to go there and go through their records and also some of the artifacts they've maintained. There's a brilliant story about one of these lodges during the First War of Independence, which is now sometimes known as the Sepoy Mutiny, where the Bible of the lodge was preserved by wrapping it up very carefully and putting it in the well of the Freemasons Hall, because they said that nobody would go into the well because they were afraid the rest of it would be, you know, ransacked. And after the war was over, the caretaker actually went into the well and retrieved the Bible. The Bible is preserved in the lodge even now. There are lots of these interesting stories are there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Brethren, before we go to the next question, just want to remind you all, if you could please pop your email address down on the chat group so that we can add you to our mailing list for our future talks, etc. That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Next, Brother CP.
Chief, my
Yes.
question to you is, what was the fee in the earlier days? Was it restrictive for the common man to join Freemasonry during those times that led to only the upper crust joining Masonry in the early days?
My personal belief is that it was not the fee which was a prohibiting factor. The fee would not have been, you know, very large, because remember something. Even if you were, say, an army officer, your pay grade was not that high. You know, it was not really that high. So they couldn't have priced themselves out. The problem for a common man was not the pricing. The problem for him was access. So the access was controlled. And if you see some of the lodge records, they talk about, you know, annas and cowries. One anna in those days was equivalent to today's 6 paise. You know, 100 paise make a rupee. So you can, 6 paise was 1 anna. So they would have charged 2 annas or 3 annas. You know, that's not much. So we're not talking about substantial holes in the pocket.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we go to Brother Charles, please?
Thank you, Ms. Worshipful. I really enjoyed your presentation. My question is, at the beginning, you mentioned that there have been traces of Freemasonry in India for over 1,000 years. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and if there would be any evidence of a connection to the European operative Masons. Thank you.
In fact, brother, I've written a paper on that, which I presented in the Masonic Studies Society in London about 10 years ago. That it's a vast subject. In brief, what I can say is, if you look at the ancient monuments, I'm talking back about early, between the years, say, 0 and 200 AD. Some of the structures which are there still standing, and you go and examine them, some of the modern concepts of Masonry are exemplified there. But what do I mean by that? One is, of course, if you look at the stones are Mason marks. So if you talk about the Mason marks, they're available there for you to see. If you see the layout of the buildings, the main deity is on the east facing west. The minor deity is in the west facing east. And the lesser deity is in the south facing north. And the north is always empty. So that corresponds to the master in the east, senior warden in the west, junior warden in the south, and the secretary kept in the dark always in the north. So that's, those basic concepts are there. But to suggest that they were, an older version of Masonry may be stretching it far. But you can draw parallels. All I can say is there are parallels. I'm just giving you a very brief of what I had written the paper about. If you're interested, if you can drop me a mail, I will send you the paper.
I would enjoy that a lot. Thank you. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Brethren, I've got no other hands up. If you would like to ask a question, please one at a time. If you could just unmute yourself and ask away.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Bharat.
Thank you.
Sorry, brother, state your name.
Jawahir, Saravanan Jawahir, Lodge, Bangalore.
Yes, brother.
I'm a little curious to know about the Danish settlement of Tranquebar and the French settlement of Karekal. You did mention about some lodges in that area. I mean, do you have some records regarding that, Worshipful Brother, Right Worshipful Brother?
The records, unfortunately, are no longer in India. They've all been taken back by the respective Grand Lodges. But there is some archival evidence in the Madras archives.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of the Madras archives?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a government archive, one of the official archives of India. And it has papers going back to the establishment of Madras. Mm-hmm. With Sir Francis Day and how he had established Madras 370 years ago.
No, I'm talking about the Tranquebar and the Danish.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, okay. So this Madras archives has some of those papers. Okay. The Madras archive is not just the city of Madras, it's the entire presidency of Madras.
Oh, okay.
And the Tranquebar was part of that because after the Dutch left, as I told you, the Dutch properties were taken over by the English.
Are there any evidence?
Lodges, sorry?
Are there any evidences of lodge in Karekal and the French territory of Karekal?
No, not to my knowledge. The only lodge evidence which I found was Lodge Sincere Amity in Pondicherry itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Bharat.
Yeah.
Sorry, can we just? I just want to mention one thing before you give your ask your question. The information I gave out earlier about the email addresses, it's slightly incorrect. I've just shared a link, and so has Mahir. If you click on the link, you will automatically join the mailing list, brother. So apologies for my misinformation before, but if you click on the link in the chat that we've put up, it will automatically put you onto the mailing list. Thank you. Sorry, brother, go ahead. Your name?
Ian Currans.
Hi, Ian. How are you, grandson?
Hi, hello, Bharat. Thank you so much.
Hi,
fascinating talk. Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You said when the Grand Lodge of India was inaugurated, there are, I think you said 145 lodges went to form the Grand Lodge of India. How many of the English, Irish, and Scottish lodges remain under those constitutions then, and how does the figures compare today?
As of today, there are 69 English constitution lodges functioning still in India.
Yeah.
And got 29 Scottish and 10 Irish as of now.
Okay.
But at the time, but in 1961, there were far more lodges, especially of the English Constitution and Scottish. But unfortunately, over a period of time, many of those lodges ceased functioning in India. Some were erased, some were shifted back to England, and then one or two went to other countries also. And there was also a lodge called Light of Kathmandu in Nepal under the English Constitution. That was shifted to Calcutta. So it was a kind of a readjustment. But the greatest loss of English Masonry and generally Masonry in India was what happened in the Northeast. At the time of India's independence, Masonry in Northeast was primarily Scottish and English. Irish were very few there. And most of the members were planters and with a sprinkling of the military. And after India became independent, and soon within a decade or so, the English people who were resident there started retiring and returning to England and Scotland, wherever. So many of their lodges lost the membership. And over a period of time, all these lodges got erased. And one of the glorious chapters of Masonry, unfortunately, came to an end. That it is very sad. There are something like 28 centers, Masonic centers in Northeast India.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Now there are only 3 or 4 centers left.
And what about partition?
Sorry.
So what about partition? What effect did that have?
See, partition was not a single blow. At the time of the partition, lodges continued to exist all across the subcontinent, even though it became 2 countries, India and Pakistan. There was a flourishing Masonic experience in what became Pakistan. And that included both East Pakistan and West Pakistan. But as the government in Pakistan became more conservative, and there was a particular instance when they became a little more concerned about Masonic experience. Let me put it in those words. So they actually banned Masonry. And it's a classic example. There's a person called Rohinton Gambata, whom many of you know.
Yeah, knew him very well.
Yeah.
Knew him very well.
Yeah. Rohinton was probably the most prominent Mason in Pakistan. He was in fact the personal physician to the Bhutto. And when Bhutto was in power, and the then general, I forget his name, I think Zia-ul Haq it was.
Zia, wasn't it?
Yeah. When he decided to ban Masonry, Bhutto was approached by Rohinton and said, do something about it. But Bhutto didn't want to get involved, so he allowed it to happen. And overnight, Masonry was banned in Pakistan. And consequently, it was also banned in what was East Pakistan at that time. So, but some of the Masonic properties, I'm told by my Pakistani friends, still are being maintained in Pakistan, but some of them have put to other use. I understand that the Freemasons Hall in Karachi has now become a post office, is what I was told.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Could we next go to Brother Sultan, please? Brother Sultan? You may be on mute.
Thank you, brother. Sorry. Right, my question has something to do with the partition as well. Were there any lodges from present-day Pakistan which brought their charter over to India or to any other parts of the world and continue Freemasonry as a lodge when it was banned in Pakistan in the 70s? Is there any records of anything happening like that?
Brother Sultan, offhand I can't say but I do know of other orders in Masonry. For example, there was a priory, Baluchistan Priory, if I'm not mistaken. That was shifted, and it functions out of Mark Mason's Hall. so it was in Pakistan. So
there is a lodge being maintained in Ireland at the Grand Lodge from Lahore. I think it's XIX, it's called.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
But I know this Baluchistan preceptory is very much functioning in Mark Mason's hall.
Mate, I'm the current master of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337. That was originally in Karachi. We now meet in the Provincial Grand Lodge of Fife and Kinross in Scotland, and we're the province's research lodge.
Right.
Wonderful.
Lovely to meet you, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
You too, Bharat. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we go to Brother Rashida, please, next?
Yes. Hello, brother. So my question is regarding the, like, you can say, ancient societies in India, secret society, you can say. So did we have any, you can say, primitive or proto form of Freemasonry that could have influenced modern day Freemasonry here? Like, you can say, there are certain secret societies we have, you can say, in mythologically or legendary societies we know. We have heard of legends and lores and stuff. So is it like, do we have any such knowledge of anything that might have influenced it today?
The oldest secret society which people refer to is Nine Wise Men. Supposedly they existed during the time of Emperor Ashoka. And this is all legendary stuff. There's no definitive proof about it. It makes for a good, what should I say, bedside story. And a cold winter night sitting next to a fireplace, you talk about this. It makes for good storyline. But I wouldn't be able to give you any definitive answer on that. Yes, the secret societies have existed across ages, and they certainly had some effect on the growth of humanity and various events. One cannot deny that. But by the very nature of them being secret, it's very hard for us to actually state with any definitive belief that yes, they're in fact true. So I can't make that statement.
Lovely, thank you. Next.
And just for your information, brother, there are certain fringe orders which are, tangentially related to Masonry, and some of them existed in India. Very famous one is called Sat Bhai, which in the translation in English is Seven Brothers. The Sat Bhai was something which was created by the British, not by the Indians, and it was created by the British East India Company. And if you have read Kipling's famous novel Kim, there's a great reference to that. Kim himself is supposed to be a member of the Sat Bhai. So according to historical record, Sat Bhai was a quasi-Masonical outfit. It was created basically to recruit what they called quote-unquote Anglo-Indians. These were the children who were born to English and Indian parents. And so they looked maybe Indian features, but they had allegiance to the English. So they could mix freely with the natives and be sort of spies for them. So this is what the concept was. And they used to communicate in secret code, and they used to meet in lodges. So that Sat Bhai as an entity existed. So, but to say that it's Masonic would be a stretch.
Thank you, Rashida. Next, could we go to, please, Brother Daniel Stone. Hi, Daniel.
Hello. Thank you, Amit. And thank you, Most Worshipful. This has been a highly enlightening chat and extremely informative. My question is a bit of a follow-on from one of the earlier ones. Can you give an idea about the protocols regarding how the Grand Lodges of England, Scotland, and Ireland remain on Indian territory with warranted blue lodges alongside of the Grand Lodge of India warranted ones?
This was a result of the negotiations held in the year from 1960 to 61. As I told you, a group of prominent Masons from India thought it was right time to have their own Grand Lodge. So the existing parent Grand Lodges at that time were England, Scotland, and Ireland. So they entered into a series of negotiations, which are long drawn out, and they came up with this formula. So according to the formula, the existing lodges in India were asked to ballot to choose whether they would remain affiliated to the parent Grand Lodge or become a foundation lodge of the new Grand Lodge. And once that polling was done, and then they said, okay, 145 lodges have opted to become the foundation lodges. The others chose to remain affiliated to their original lodges. So then the question came of, getting into the nitty-gritty of this. So in the beginning, it was very clearly mentioned that the 3 parent Grand Lodges would not be permitted to consecrate any further new lodges within India. And similarly, the newly formed Grand Lodge of India will not be permitted to consecrate lodges outside India. So, and they will be allowed to function. What are existing will be allowed to function. Grand Lodge of India can go ahead and consecrate further lodges within India. So, and as far as the existing lodges, they would continue to be allowed to function freely without any fetters. So that was the understanding that was reached. It's called a Concordat. So the Concordat has a lot of clauses. So this, I'm just simplifying it. So this was basic understanding. And it stood that, I mean, there were hiccups now and then. As in all human relationships, there are always going to be hiccups, especially in a family. Sometimes a wiser counsel prevails and the hiccups are removed, return to balance, normality. So as things stand now, all the 4 are in amity and we recognize each other. There are certain restrictions. There are certain restrictions which can learn to live with.
Lovely, thank you. Next, I'm not certain.
Thank you, most worshipful.
Thank you.
For the RSM, let's take yourself off mute.
Okay. Rabbi Brother Bharat, it's an intriguing lecture, and of course you not only answer the questions, but you give us the depth of all your knowledge of all the degrees you're in. So my question is that in most of our provinces and districts, particularly in Sri Lanka, we suffer from the fact that our membership is getting older and our recruitment is still proceeding, but it's still difficult. How is that faring in India? Are you recruiting many young people? Are you keeping your membership? Are you sustaining that?
It's a mixed bag, David. The numbers, if you look at the overall numbers, it is showing an increase. It's not a decrease. Certainly there's an increase. But what my personal experience, being active in Masonry for so long, has been that the new Masons which we are getting in, the youngsters, they come from a different world altogether compared to what we did even as recently as 20 years ago. The youngsters coming into Masonry now, their worldly outlook, their job environment, their interests, and all of them are quite different from what ours was. In our days, when you joined a company, you ended up retiring in the same company. Job mobility was not that high. Nowadays, the youngsters, at the drop of the hat, they shift companies, they shift countries. Today, they are in this country, next day they're in Singapore, sometimes they're in Canada, they're all over the place. So that rootedness is lacking. Number 2, they don't work to fixed hours. For us, for instance, when we knew that our lodge meeting was on a Friday evening at 6:30, once a month, we could schedule our work around that. Nowadays, these kids are on conference calls according to various time zones and all sorts of things. So they are in a different situation altogether. All this has a bearing on their involvement and commitment to Masonry. It's not that they're not interested. It's just that the circumstances surrounding them make it difficult for them to do justice. So time and often we see youngsters fading out. It's very rare to find a youngster who's committed and remains committed over any length of time. So we are facing that problem definitely in India. The second issue which is affecting India is the immense growth of our cities. When Masonry first came to India, as I mentioned, all the great Masonic halls were built downtown, center of the city. The city has expanded geographically over vast distances. And these youngsters have got jobs which are in the peripheries.
They're not working in the city. They're working in these IT parks and other parks, which are all spread out. So if you want them to attend a weekday meeting at 6 o'clock, given the traffic horrendous conditions, they'll have to leave work at 4 o'clock to drive or come, And if the guy goes and asks his boss, let me off at 4 o'clock, why I want to attend a Masonic meeting, he'll probably be given a piece of his mind. So this is another issue which is affecting us. So we have these problems facing us. It's for us to now find creative solutions to this. One solution was that they came up with the concept of what was called daylight lodges, which are lodges meant for these youngsters, which meet on Sunday. Sunday being the only free day they have. So they have created this daylight lodge, which will meet in those peripheral areas, not in the center cities, in their peripheral area. And they go with their wives and families. So that wives and kids are kept engaged while the meeting is on. And after the meeting is over, they all get together and have a Sunday brunch. So that is something which has been thought of. The jury is still out. I won't say it's been an undeclared success. Neither has it been a failure. It's a work in progress. That's all I can say. I hope I've answered your question, Dave.
Can I follow up with that? Can I ask you, in terms of the other orders of Masonry which have been thriving in India, there seems to be no lack of interest. There's been no lack of interest in the Zoom meetings that we've heard in the last few weeks, of which you've been great participants. So is that enthusiasm from the core who are older, or is that also attracting some of the younger, more interested brethren in the Masonic knowledge beyond the level of ritual, beyond the level of just attending meetings?
David, those who have gone into these higher Masonic progressive orders are necessarily those who have already shown and demonstrated interest in Masonry. So we are already talking about a filtered group of brethren. So I think their interest has been amply demonstrated. So that's why they continue that interest. My earlier response was restricted to the craft level of Masonry, which is where the issues are. When you talk about, for example, the RSM or operatives or whatever, the brethren in that have already demonstrated their commitment. So they continue that commitment.
Lovely, thank you. Bharat, we are going to have one more question, if that's okay with you. I'm going to hand the mic over to Brother Mahir Kilik.
Thank you very much, Amit. Most worshipful, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I was installed as a worship master to a lodge called Lodge Light of the Craft, which was consecrated in India, 18th of January 1908, and it was after some meetings they had there, and they moved back to London 1948. This was the last meeting picture they had in India, and I was just wondering, I'll be very happy after the speech to arrange a visit with our brethren in London who wish to come and visit a lodge in India. I'll be very happy to organize something like a small trip. If you can help us to organize after this pandemic over, perhaps for next year, I'll be glad to organize something with my lodge, and we may extend it to brethren in Freemasons Without Borders. I'll contact you after this presentation, definitely.
I'll be delighted to be part of it, and I can, if things work out well, I could also be your chaperone during the visit.
Thank you very much again. Most worshipful. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Okay, most worshipful.
Yeah.
sorry, well, I think we should call
Thank
it
you.
time.
Thank you, Mahir. Thank you.
May I just say, first of all, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I had the benefit of obviously having a read through the presentation beforehand. It's absolutely superb, very well presented, and I'm sure very fruitful for everybody who joined our call today. Thank you very much, brethren. Just a small reminder that next week we have Dr. David Staples, the CEO and Chief Executive Officer of the Grand Lodge, United Grand Lodge of England on. Thank you very much for your time once again. And I wish you all a very, very good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Safe.
Thank
Everyone
you.
be safe.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Brother, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.